Shall we start?
Yes, Dr. Sabrina, just a second. My system just restarted for some reason.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just start. Okay, we are going live now.
Shall we begin, or
Yes.
how?
Yeah, I'll just.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning and good evening to those who are joining from different parts of the globe. My name is Isha Saraswat, and I welcome you all to the 4th thematic session for Delivering for Nutrition in South Asia, Transforming Diets. And this session is titled Children's Diet Determinants and Interventions in South Asia. Last day and today morning, we talked about diets in general. We talked about diets of mothers. We talked about diets of adolescents. And now we will be talking about the children's diets, determinants, and interventions in South Asia. Before handing it over to the co-chairs, I would just like to make some housekeeping announcements that this session will be recorded and later published on the conference website. For now, all the participants have been muted, and you are free to post all your questions in the Q&A box during the session. If a question similar to you appears in the Q&A box, kindly upvote it to avoid repetition. Towards the end of the session, if we have time, we will allow the participants to raise their virtual hand so they can ask their question live to all our presenters and co-chairs. And last but not the least, if you face any difficulty during the session in connecting or in the audio or video, kindly try to check your internet settings and rejoin using the same link. You can always reach out to us if you are still not able to join. With this, I would like to introduce the co-chairs of this session, Dr. Sabrina Rashid and Dr. Romaina Iqbal. Dr. Sabrina Rashid is a scientist at the International Center for Diarrheal Disease Research, Bangladesh, ICDDRB, and is based in Dhaka, Bangladesh. She works with the Urban Health Team of Health Systems and Population Studies Division of ICDDRB. In terms of the focus of her research in Bangladesh, Dr. Rashid has extensive experience in working on maternal and child nutrition, health systems, urban health, ICT for health and climate change. She has conducted policy analysis, implementation research, and evaluation of large-scale health and nutrition program. Dr. Rashid has a PhD in international nutrition from Cornell University. Welcome, Dr. Rashid. Our next co-chair is Dr. Romaina Iqbal, who's a nutrition epidemiologist by training. She's the section head for NCDs and mental health in the Department of Community Health Sciences at the Aga Khan University, Pakistan. Her research interests include measuring diet in different population groups in South Asia, food environment in LMICs, and the association of diet with CVD and diabetes. I welcome both of you, and I hand over the session to you. We have 8 presentations in this session, and each presenter has been allotted 7 minutes. So yeah, over to both of you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this thematic session 4 on children's diet and determinants and interventions. So this is a very important, I feel that this is a very important session because the scale of undernutrition among children in South Asia is quite exceptional, despite the high rates of economic progress we made. And understanding, we have collected data in different countries. We have done experiments with interesting intervention to try and address this. So I think this would be a really interesting session where we learn from you about what has been done so far, and maybe get some ideas about gaps and what needs to be done next. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hello, and thank you all for being here with us. As mentioned by Isha, I'm Rumana Iqbal, work at the Aga Khan University in Pakistan. It's a pleasure for me to be co-sharing this very important session on child's diets, determinants, and interventions in South Asia. And in particular, I'm very pleased to see the mix of presentations that we'll be hearing shortly. Some of them go more into situational analysis, whereas some have very direct implications for intervention and scale up and policy. So with these words, once again, I welcome you all, and let's move forward. And I'll request Dr. Sabrina to introduce our very first speaker. Thanks.
Sabrina, you're on mute.
Yeah. So the first presentation is about nutritional status and dietary pattern of children under 5 in selected districts of Assam. And I believe the speaker is JR from Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. Please start your presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. The presentation is titled Nutritional Status and Diet Patterns of Children under 5 in the select districts of Assam. I'm presenting some of the findings from a larger study conducted by Humanities and Social Sciences Department of IIT Guwahati with the Directorate of Economics and Statistics of Assam. Next slide, please. So we conducted this study to understand the nutritional status of children, the complementary feeding practices, and diet patterns in 7 districts of Lower Assam. And this region it has been reporting high incidence of malnutrition and maternal and child mortality over the years. The study area included 7 districts, of which 5 were aspirational districts, and 3 districts were under the autonomous administrative area of Bodoland territorial region. The survey was conducted between September 2019 and February 2022, and we collected primary data from 987 households. Next slide, please. So here on the left side of the slide, the chart shows standing, wasting, underweight rates along with the composite index of anthropometric failure called CIAF, calculated using survey data. Here, the CIF refers to the total number of children who are either standard, wasted, or underweight. Standing rates for the region is 41%, wasting is 13, and underweight is 28. However, the CIF show that almost 50% of the children have at least one form of anthropometric failure. Barpeta district has the highest incidence of anthropometric failure, with 66% of children falling into the CIF category. Gwalpara has the highest incidence of wasting, and Darang has the highest incidence of low birth weight. The better performing districts are Kokrajhar, Bongaigaon, Udalguri, all of them falling under the Bodoland territorial region. On the right side, the chart shows severe undernutrition indicators and the percentage of children who are simultaneously standard, wasted, and underweight. Severe standing for the region is 20%, severe wasting is 4%, and severe underweight is 11%. We can see a similar pattern as we saw in the previous chart as far as performance of the districts are concerned. Next slide, please. So here we are looking at minimum acceptable diet in complementary feeding. We found that only 25% of the children receive a minimum acceptable diet, and the percentage is low mainly due to very low diet diversity. Even the better performing districts, as far as nutritional status indicators are concerned, have very low percentage of children receiving a minimum diet. In fact, Kokrajhar and Udalguri are the 2 districts with lowest diet diversity in complementary feeding. Next slide, please. Here we can see the food groups used for complementary feeding. Grains, roots, and tubers are the main food groups used, followed by fruits, vegetables, and dairy products. On the other hand, legumes and nuts are the least used food groups, followed by flesh foods and eggs. Next slide, please. Okay, now we are moving to the findings from household food consumption data. This slide has information on the quantity of different food groups consumed as percentage of the total food consumption of the household. As we can see, roots and tubers are most consumed, contributing between 16 to 18% of the total quantity of food consumed, followed by the food group of sugar, salt, and packaged food, which contribute 13 to 17%. Cereals contribute between 10 to 15% of the total consumption, vegetables between 11 to 13%, pulses and legumes between 7 to 13%, edible oils between 7 to 9%, and fruits between 5 to 9%. The least consumed groups are egg, meat, milk, fish, and leafy vegetables, all of which are consumed less than 5% of the total consumption each. This pattern is more or less similar across districts. Next slide, please. Okay, but when we look at the expenditure on different food groups, there is significant differences between the order of food groups from what we saw in the previous slide. There is also very high variation. The largest expenditure is on edible oils in most of the districts, and it contributes between 14 to 24% of the total food expenditure. Meat and poultry follow edible oils and contribute between 9 to 19%, followed by fish that contribute 9 to 18%, and pulses and legumes contribute 9 to 16%. We can also see that the expenditure on roots and tubers, which is the highest quantity consumed food groups, is at 5th with the range of 7 to 11%. The smallest expenditure remains on eggs with less than 0.3% of the total expenditure. Milk and milk products contribute only 3 to 6% of the total expenditure. Vegetables 4 to 5%, and cereals between 5 to 8%. Next slide, please. So the key takeaways from the study are there is high inter-district variation in nutritional status outcomes, complementary feeding practices and diet patterns, especially regarding expenditure on different food groups. Diet diversity is extremely low in all survey districts, including the better performing ones. We would also like to highlight the low consumption of legumes, nuts, fresh foods, and eggs in these districts, and high consumption of sugar, salt, and packaged foods. We also want to point out the high expenditure on edible oils, meat, fish, and pulses. Also, there is scope for further research to explore the reasons behind the low consumption of certain affordable food groups. Thank you, everyone. I think that's my 7 minutes.
Thank you, Jeet, for an excellent presentation.
Thank you. And we'll take questions towards the end, Jeet. So moving on to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Stacey Saha. Stacey is a nurse, she's a midwife and an epidemiologist who has worked at LAM, Lutheran Aid to Medicine in Bangladesh. And she was basically a manager looking at management information systems and taking care of the research department over there. She'll be talking about identifying enabling factors and barriers for good child nutrition in a rural Bangladesh population. Over to you, Stacey.
Sorry. Yes, we can start with the next slide. So despite targeted interventions to pregnant women and families of children under 2 in a 1,000 days nutrition program, improvement in exclusive breastfeeding, minimum dietary diversity, minimum meals, and anthropometric outcomes were limited in this project. And so the purpose of this 3-year action research was to inform implementation of this ongoing rural nutrition project through assessment of current nutritional status of these children, 6 to 24 months of age, and identification of local positive and negative deviant behaviors related to feeding, caring, hygiene, and health care. Next. So our methodology, I will go ahead, included having a cohort of 558 children in 3 unions in this project, and they were followed from 6 months to 2 years, doing 6 monthly assessments. Focus groups were also held with parents, grandparents of children under 2 to look at breastfeeding and complementary feeding attitudes and practices. Other anthropometric assessments were done, and as well, a 10% sample of well-nourished children from the poorest 40% of the cohort, the positive deviants, and a 5% sample of poorly nourished children from the wealthiest 40%, the negative deviants, of families were interviewed at home using World Vision guidelines that they have produced in Bangladesh. So looking at good food practices, good care, good hygiene, good health care, recognizing that all these contribute to children's nutritional status. Next. So our results showed that minimum dietary diversity and minimum meals increased with the age of the cohort, minimum dietary diversity being particularly low throughout the 2 years of the children. There's more there. We also looked at individual foods, so Go foods, carbohydrates, and fat. The most common food was rice, which was consumed by almost all the children the previous day from 12 months on. Growth foods. Could you click again? There's another part to this slide. But protein foods we found were very low. By 24 months, about 75% of children had had dal or lentils the day before. Eggs, less than 1 in 5 children at all ages, and meat and fish consumption increased with age. And then what they call glow foods, the vitamin-rich foods, again, green leafy vegetables were consumed by about 1 in 5 at various ages, but citrus and other fruits were low. Next. Next. As we've seen in some of the other studies, there was higher than expected intake of non-nutritional packaged foods. So at 6 months of age, already 1 in 10 children had consumed this type of food the day before, and this increased to 9 out of 10 children by the time they were 24 months of age. So in the qualitative, the focus group discussions, we asked, why do you feed your children food from the shops, the packaged foods? And so moms and grandmothers, one of the most things they cited was convenience. It takes too long to boil an egg, fruit shops are far away, and also the baby likes it and cries. Fathers and grandfathers also said that it's to keep the baby quiet while so that the mom can work. The child also wants what other children are eating. Another social factor they brought up is that if you go visiting, it's an acceptable gift to bring. But if they bring a boiled egg, people will think we're all uncultured. And the fathers also sort of blame their wives, saying, our wives tell us, the child, that we will bring them something from the shops, but there aren't nutritious snacks available in the shops. And those interviewed didn't really have much idea how it can be stopped, except that maybe if children aren't given snacks from the shops, they will eventually get hungry and eat homemade food. Next. When we looked at the positive and negative deviant interviews, then we saw that positive deviant behaviors included decreasing breastfeeding frequency and increasing complementary feeding in the 2nd year, using family food for complementary feeding from 6 months of age, and giving nutritious bits, for example, liver from family food to the child under 2. Negative deviant behaviors included starting complementary feeding before 6 months and feeding mostly rice, suji, formula, energy foods for complementary feeding, and frequent breastfeeding into the 3rd year, which perhaps decreased the intake of other complementary foods. Good care practices included carrying the child on mother's back while working, teaching good habits from a young age, and building routines for eating and sleeping. And good hygiene practices, the better nourished children, mothers, and wash their hands with soap and wash their babies' hands with soap, where that was not the case with the poor nourished children. Next. So implications, as others have said, knowledge of local food and cultural practices are key to improving diets. Just giving the nutrition messages is not enough to change families' practices. And we recommend that further research is needed to explore the father's and grandfather's role in childcare nutrition, social and commercial factors, contributing to consumption of low nutrition purchased snacks, and the role of government perhaps in regulating and labeling, and also looking more at traditional recipes. What were children fed before all these other foods were available in the shops? Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. There's one question for you in the chat. Perhaps you can answer it. There's a lot of interest in the work that you just presented, and somebody has asked as to whether you have already published this or not. So now moving on to our our third presenter, and over to you, Dr. Sabrina, for introducing that person.
Okay. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. The next presenter we have here, Farzana Sultana Bari, Associate Professor, Prime Asia University and PhD student, INFS Dhaka University. And she is going to talk about long-term impact of integrated agriculture and health-based intervention program on dietary behaviors of under 5 children in southern part of Bangladesh. Over to you, Farzana Bari.
Thank you. Respected chairs, organizers, and audience, a very good afternoon to you. I'm Farzana Sultana Bari, PhD student from Institute of Nutrition and Food Science at Dhaka University, under supervision of Dr. Najma Shaheen. Yes. Today's topic is part of my PhD research work. Next slide, please. As we know, undernutrition coupled with poor feeding practices in childhood is a serious public health concern, which might potentially lead to negative health consequences in adulthood. Nutrition-sensitive intervention, agriculture initiatives could play an initiative role in reducing malnutrition by modifying dietary behaviors and ensure adequate nutrition. Next slide, please. Despite the extensive implementation of nutrition-sensitive intervention programs, there has been no strong evidence of their long-term impact on sustainability on dietary behaviors after the project completion. Long-term outcome evaluation research is thus needed to ensure the global sustainability of nutrition and health promotion programs. Well, Bangladesh has made some progress in reducing malnutrition and improving dietary practices, but disaster-prone areas such as Satkhira, Khulna, and Borishal are suffering from food insecurity. Keeping this in mind, a project was implemented in those selected districts named Integrated Agriculture and Health-Based Intervention for Improved Food and Nutrition Security in selected districts of southern Bangladesh, in short, IFPRI, which was a joint initiative of the government of Bangladesh, supported by FAO, UNICEF, and USAID. I have selected that project as my research interest with an aim to capture the evidence of long-term impact of the IFPRI project interventions on dietary behaviors of the children participating in the program. Next slide, please. First of all, I'd like to explain IFPRI project in brief. The project continued for 3 years, from 2013 to 2015. During these 3 years, the project provided 3 nutrition-sensitive interventions, that is, nutrition education training that involved training to improve dietary diversity, complementary feeding, child health and nutrition. Second intervention was distribution of inputs such as seeds, fish fingerlings, poultry, ruminant distribution. And another one was cooking demonstration to promote nutrient-dense complementary feeding recipes. The project's inline study was conducted in 2015 with a first follow-up in 2016 and second follow-up in 2021. A qualitative explorative study was conducted to capture the changes over those 3 points of time where qualitative findings from reports and documents of the inline and follow-up 1 study were used as secondary data source and analyzed accordingly. On the other hand, primary data were collected to follow-up study 2 for follow-up study 2, which was conducted after 5 years of project completion. Next slide, please. In follow-up 2 study, Shofipur and Batamara Union of Borishal district was considered as study site. Data were collected from the beneficiaries receiving project interventions, that is the mother of children of under 5 years of age, and from the implementers using individual protocol and guideline for focus group discussion, key informant interview, and in-depth interview. Thematic analysis were used to analyze the data using selective indicators, that is food-based nutrition education and cooking demonstration. Next slide, please. Well, this slide is all about the key findings of the comparative study, which divides the long-term impact of the interventions into sustainable and non-sustainable components that could be considered as contributors in altering child dietary practices. From the study findings, training on food-based nutrition education and cooking demonstration were found beneficial to beneficiaries. In the light of project objective, the children's dietary pattern and behavior improved at the end of the study. They perceived a better understanding of a diversified and balanced diet, and as well as safe and healthy cooking practices, such as properly cutting vegetables after washing, adding sour fruits into regular meals, improving complementary feeding, and IFPRI practices. Furthermore, practicing new recipes that are beneficial for their children as well as for themselves, for women, food preservation and food processing activities were found to be practiced up to follow-up 1 study. The findings of follow-up 2 study demonstrated that beneficiaries continue to perceive enhanced knowledge on child health care and dietary diversification. One of the most important findings, that is people are diversifying their diet by utilizing locally available food items and improving their traditional diet rather than attempting new recipes. They are actually use the new recipes occasionally. Unfortunately, food preservation or food processing activities from training were not sustainable due to preference for conventional methods. Furthermore, individuals who could afford felt proud and believed that processed foods were more nutritious and standard for their children. A lack of follow-up training was also observed, which may impede the path to changing perceived behaviors. Another thing I need to mention, that individuals' attitude and behaviors cannot be changed overnight. It takes time to transform knowledge to regular practices, and such intervention programs are critical for bringing about positive changes in people's attitudes toward dietary practices and eventually nutritional improvement, which is a commitment in achieving sustainable development goal. Next slide, please. Based on my findings, I would like to propose some policy implications. That is, traditional recipes can be improvised using locally available nutritious foods. And the technology advanced traditional food preservation training can be promoted. As we already discussed in our findings, that they are actually dependent on conventional methods. So if we introduce technology advanced traditional food preservation technique, that could be more beneficial for them. And community people need to be motivated through inspirational training or counseling by skilled professionals. And sustainability of the intervention program may be ensured through regular follow-up training by assigned representatives. And the last one, similar intervention program can be initiated in other areas with high rates of malnutrition by the development implementers. That's all from my side. Thank you for your patience hearing.
Thank you, Farzana, for a very interesting talk and certainly quite thought-provoking. There are some very interesting questions for you, which you might want to answer in the question and answer chat section. We'll now move on to the next presentation, and this presentation will be by Indra Keshetri, who works at Outreach and Knowledge Management for USAID funded Suhara 2 Good Nutrition Program in Nepal. And Indra's main interest is using digital and social media and technologies for behavior change. So over to you, Indra.
Thanks, Romana, for that introduction. Can we start the slide now? Because I have already been introduced. So as you see, I'm presenting on behalf of two other co-authors. Christine Gans is the Deputy Chief of Party for Suhara 2 program, and Ramesh Adhikari is Senior Manager, all three of us working with Helen Keller International in Nepal. So in this study, we are trying to look at the association between a particular radio program that we have been producing and broadcasting and certain dietary outcomes for mother and children. Next, please. So just to show that for some of you who may be unaware about the scale of the Suhara 2 program, we are pretty huge, covering more than 60% of these dark blue areas in Nepal. It's an integrated nutrition project that combines, maternal and child health, and nutrition, family planning, agriculture, and gender equality and social inclusion. Next, please. The data in this study are brought from a large-scale study that we did during COVID-19. The objective of the broad study was to assess health and nutrition services and practices during the COVID-19 context in all of the Suhara 2 working areas. This is first in three subsequent, studies that we did, surveys we did. In particular, in this phase, we interviewed 23,471 mothers from 353 municipalities, and we also interviewed health workers and female community health volunteers. So this is this was in sampling. We did it representative sample up to the municipality level. And the method was, because due to COVID, the movements were restricted, we collected the data through telephone calls. Next, please. So, as I said, the biggest study had many indicators, but in this presentation particularly, I am trying to explore how listening to radio program makes difference in maternal and child child nutrition practices. Next, please. So this is a conceptual framework that we used: exposure to a certain program, and with these 4 outcomes. And we also looked at the socio-demographic and economic confounders. As you can see, mother's year of schooling, father currently at home, household head, who is the household head, on household caste, ethnicity, household wealth, equity quintile. So based on these are some of the confounders that we considered while making this analysis. Next, please. Just to give the background, we had mothers of 25 years in average, 25 years of age in average. 47% had completed grade 10 or above. 46% are from bottom 40% of Nepali population, and 68% of the families had father residing at home at the time of survey. You can see also the caste ethnicity, and half the population was from disadvantaged groups, followed by 41% Brahmin, Kshatriya, and 9% other. Next, please. So just let's see, to the entire population, we had 42% listen to Vanchinama radio program at least once a month. This is exposure, and 48% of the surveyed households met minimum acceptable diet. That should be minimum meal frequency for children. 62% met minimum dietary diversity. 49% sick children were fed more during illness, and half the mothers met dietary diversity. This is the prevalence. Next, please. And after adjusting the confounders, we found that listening to Vanchinama had association to all of these indicators, as you can see, and it's significantly statistically significant, as you can see in the p-value. Next, please. So study implications. As I said, these findings suggest that listening to the Vanchinama, and that's Mother's Knows Best program, at least once a month, was significantly associated with good maternal and child feeding practices. And this was true for emergency like COVID-19 too, and the development. The organizers can replicate this method even in the emergency. It is equally effective in emergencies too. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Please have a look at the chat box to see if you have questions from the audience. The next presentation is leveraging the private sector resources in nutrition to shape the dietary practices among children under 2 years of age. This presentation will be made by Atul Upadhyay. I hope I got your pronunciation right. He is from Balia, Nepal Nutrition Initiative. Please go ahead and start your presentation, Atul.
Atul, are you there?
Atul is here. Atul, are you able to unmute yourself? Do you want to move on?
Yeah, maybe
next
we can
presentation?
go to the next presentation, and while Atul can fix his settings. Is it okay, Dr. Sabrina?
What did you say? The next presentation?
Yeah,
Yes,
Atul
please.
is just facing
I think
some
Okay.
Atul is back. Could you please check? Hi, Atul.
Let's go to the
I
next.
think
Maybe.
we just
Let's go to the next presentation then.
Yes.
Okay, so we will now have the presentation on evaluation of overall diet quality indexes of children at age of 6 to 24 months and its impact on health in Matiari, Sindh, Pakistan, by Sonam Sumru from Aga Khan University. Yeah.
Sonam, over to you.
And
so, Sonam, can you hear us? Okay, we are facing issues with two presenters in a row.
yeah.
Our secretariat team, kindly please check with Atul and Sanam. Atul, are you back?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so we can go ahead
Okay.
with Atul's presentation.
Maybe we can go ahead with Atul.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll just share.
Okay.
Yeah, Atul, please proceed.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for this opportunity. First of all, I'm stuck in some other place and I got confused with the time. Anyway, so the first thing is what I'm trying to present here is how Bali Nepal Nutrition Initiative, a not-for-profit company, is trying to leverage the private sector resources in nutrition movement so that we can shape the dietary practices in the country, particularly among children under 2. Next, please. Next slide.
We have moved the slide, Atul. Can you see the background slide?
No, I am still with the slide number 1.
I think there's some internet connectivity at your end. We
Okay,
are
I got it
in
my other unit. That's fine.
Yeah, so you can just go ahead. The slides are changing.
Yeah, okay. So what happens is that as we know the status of Nepal from 2016 to 19, and then our 25 target and it's
Atul, we lost you. Can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
If there is internet issue, you can just turn off your camera. Maybe that will save your bandwidth.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so with all these 4 different this manifestation of malnutrition, I think you can hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. So sorry. Okay, so the target here is, can we reach the goals that we have set by 2030? Is it possible? So this is a big challenge. Coming next slide, please. And then what we see is what were the gaps that were found, and we did a study in 2018, Helen Keller International Arch study, which in the unhealthy snacking habits of children. The long length for age was reduced due to unhealthy snacking. There was a not clear role of private sector, ineffective regulation and monitoring, and of course, declining rate of exclusive breastfeeding. So what was thought then was that why don't we do something, bring something, make this private sector come into the movement, because they are the major producers of the food that are purchased and consumed in the country, engage them, involve them, so that people would get supply of nutritious food, and also at the same time engage the community that they start demanding nutritious and fortified foods. And then the third thing is we have to also work with regulators for effective policy. And therefore, there came a next slide, please. And then I proposed a new mantra, and that's what we call on the next slide the POSHAN mantra. Here, the basic thing is that we involve 3 sectors: the private sector, the governments, and the community. And these 3 sectors are tackled, engaged, invested through different approaches, where you can see it in the slide. For private sector, we provide formulation, technology support. Governments, we provide them advocacy, capacitate them, and also develop labeling guidelines, fortification plans, and all those things. And on the demand side, we do lots of activities which would which would then promote the consumers to go and demand for nutrition fortified foods, engaging retail shopkeepers, engaging school students, engaging community volunteers, and engaging the distributors, the transporters, the media, and all these things. So the basic concept that we are doing at Bali, Nepal, that next slide shows that. Next slide, please. The main thing that we are doing at Bali, Nepal is then demand side intervention, supply side intervention, and working with government. With demand side intervention, we talk with FCHVs, we orientate students, and we also have a dream building capacity working with engaging sports in nutrition. Cricket is the sports that Nepal loves a lot. So we're using cricket as a tool to promote nutrition. And the supply side, we're working with large companies to produce sachets of complementary food with HSR3. Each sachet provides 30% RNI, and we talk with the shopkeepers, and with government, we're participating in different activities. So, and next slide, please. What we found in a very preliminary finding was that there was an increase in the sales of commercially fortified porridge. There was also increase in sales of other porridges. Affordability was one of the prime criteria why people bought it. Appeal was the other criteria. The promotion channels, shopkeepers, and these were the channels that were used to promote this fortified foods. And finally, the last slide, please. And finally, the significance is that the availability, affordable, and convenience of healthy options can increase the consumption of safe and nutritious food. Private sectors can play a major role. We can leverage the resources. We have done that. And then government could work an effective regulatory mechanism. And the application part of Bali Nepal is that we are now replicating the Bali Nepal movement, scaling up the market model across all the country, and the new fortified, processed, and nutritious foods are being developed, prototype are made, and new foods are coming to the market so that all people can get a better and nutritious and affordable food. Thank you so much for the time and patience. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Atul. That was a very interesting presentation, and I'd like to congratulate you. Working with the private sector, in particular food companies, is not an easy feat. So congratulations and hats off to you on that. We'd now like to move on to our next presenter. I hope Sanam is here. Do we know?
Yes, she is there.
All right, great.
Hope she's able to unmute herself. So that's good.
Oh, there she is, right, thank you. So we'll now move on to our next presenter, Sanam Sumro, who works at the Aga Khan University. She did a PhD in the field of analytical chemistry and is currently working as a nutrition analyst and a food analyst here with us since last 3 years. And she'll be talking about evaluation of overall diet quality indices of the children at the age of 6 to 24 months and its impact on health in Matiari, Sindh, Pakistan. Thank you. Over to you, Sanam.
Thank you, Rumaina Iqbal. Hello, everyone. I think Dr. Rumaina has introduced me very well. So now I'm moving towards my presentation. Are you listening me properly?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Please, next slide. Here are the outlines of my presentations, which are objectives, methods, results, and policy implications. Next slide, please. Objectives are simply I'm just simply evaluating the dietary pattern of infant children's changes with respect to the age, and also the quality indexes under the age of 6 to 24 months. And last, I will also provide you the diet quality indices used for the evaluation. It would be a standard way. Next slide, please. Some methods that we have used, simply we have selected the area of Matiari, which is located in the district which is located in the Pakistan province of the Sindh. The population of this district is around 7 lakhs, and under the childs which are there under the year are around 70,687. In there, we have selected the two union councils of this of Matiari district, which are about the 400 villages. A total of 370 children was selected, which were divided into 2 into two studies. One is case and other one is a control. In case studies, we have selected those children which are stud, and for control, those are comes into the normal weight. The control studies were based on the 50 children, and then 20 children of the case studies. Next slide, please. Simply, we have collected the 24 for recall of each month by following this standard pattern of 24 questions, which are based on the 23 questions. Next slide, please. Next slide. Still, please. This is completely 23 years question. Please, next slide. We have collected the data and analyzed them. First, we have homogenized the whole data according to the standard way we call the EFSA Food Explorer, and then nutrient data set were developed against the FAO inverse criteria. We have used to develop the food inputs by using the different food composition tables which were available in the South Asia, like food composition table of Pakistan for collecting the nutrient data set, and food composition table of Bangladesh, India, as well as USDA food composition tables for evaluating the nutrients index of the snacks food, because most of the snacks food were not analyzed yet into the other food composition data of the Asias. Next slide, please. Here are the standard guidelines. Initially, I want to let you know about the standard guidelines that we used into the Pakistan. These guidelines were given into the National Nutritional Dietary Guidelines into the for the best nutrition. They are asking to us that initiate the breastfeeding within an hour of birth, and then exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months, and continue breastfeeding until 2 years, and introduce the complementary feeding at the 6 months, and gradually increase the food consistency and varieties, and practice the good hygiene by washing hands frequently with soap, particularly preparing and eating foods, and after using the towels, use plate, utensils, and so on. Please, next slide. And here they are letting us know that how to eat your children while they are at month of 6 to 8. They're letting us know that please you may feed your children with the age of 6 to 8 months with banana, mashed potato, thick porridge, kheer, vegetable soups, and khichdi at about 2 to 3 times with gradually breast milk feedings. And later on 9 to 11 months, it's about 3 to 4 times with the soft foods, which is banana, mashed potato, and so on. And likewise on to the 12 to 13 months with some additional snacks food, and with eggs, sandwiches, bananas, and fish and chicken. So we have to avoid just giving them these candies, sweets, bakery products, and beverages to children. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Here I have we have just surveyed the groups of the we have surveyed the food groups consumption patterns under the age of different. I have grouped these all ages into the 3 groups. Number 1 is 6 months, number 2 is 7 to 12 months, and then greater than months. We have seen that the cereals and small milks groups were consumed to 100% of children in all over the studies, in case even in the control studies. At the first stage, I have seen that the roots and tubers were gradually increases with the as per the as we have gone through the ages like 6, 7, and 12. Like if in control studies, the roots and tubers consumption is 11.8, and while in control it is 14%, and then it is gradually increases up to the 42-69%. Here we have seen that beside this, there is no as much eating habits were being seen. Good dietary diversity has been seen under the age of 6 months, because they are gradually at this age. If we say that it's good enough for the, as we have seen into the dietary guidelines, it is a good enough that up to the month of age we are gradually increased. So it's good up to the 6 months, but as we are gradually increased up to the 6 to 12 months, there is not as much good amount of foods they are consuming. Likewise, I have more evaluating the food subgroups consumption patterns, which we have seen that only the few foods that are most frequently were eaten under the age of the 6 months, which is most commonly in both areas. Even in the control studies, they are eating is the less foods as compared to the case studies. This is good for the this is good according to the dietary guidelines. Next slide, please. Here the food consumption pattern surveyed of the age groups of the 7 to 12 months, where here is also increasing. Here the children are eating the meal as meal with respect to the snacks as well. The snacks they are adding in this age groups are like the crisp, cake, sponge cakes, and puff pastries, chocolates, which are not good for their health, but their amount of consumption is less than 10 grams per day. And besides, we have seen that the consumption of breast milk into the control is at a higher percentage as compared to the case studies. And likewise, other things are almost similar, but the consumption of good quality of food is more more as into the control as compared to the case studies. Next slide, please. Here we have surveyed the 12 months food consumption dietary patterns, which shows that they had the gradually increases some more amount of the foods, but the diversity we have seen that there's not as much foods groups. Means if we are getting the pulses, they are just only one yellow lentil are most frequently consumption. If we are saying that cereals, the only wheat flour bread and some type of food is consumption. If we are saying the fruit is not much variety of fruits they are eating. They are just getting the banana and mango. Mango is only of the control studies, whereas a banana only one fruit that is continually in all age groups are eating. Besides there's no other fruits are eating. There's no diversity of roots and tubers they are eating during their dietary patterns. Only few of foods they are continue eating. Mostly they are have the diversity of milk dairy products rather to the other cereals and other groups. Next slide, please. Here we have calculated the dietary diversity score. We have seen that under the age of 16, the 79% of children are under the minimum dietary diversity value, 20% are medium in control studies, and about 1% is in the maximum. This is a good for this age. And likewise, in control studies, it is about 86% are minimum dietary diversity, and medium dietary diversity about 14%, and no one child has consumed more than 7 food groups into the control studies to reach their maximum dietary diversity. Likewise, we have seen that overall the pictures that about 40%, our ratio is about 50%. As we are increasing gradually, that most of the even in control as well as in case study, the diversity due to the same areas and their eating behaviors are the same. Therefore, the eating patterns are not much as differentiate between two studies. But there is the main issue which is we have seen is the absorption of nutrients. Maybe they cause the
Sanam, I'm sorry, I'll appreciate it if you can wrap up in the next 30 some seconds, please. Thank you.
Sure. Next slide, please. Here we have seen that most of the micronutrients were deficient, about the more than 50 to 100% under the 6 months of the age. Next slide, please. Even there is a micro and micronutrition deficiency here. You may say 7 to 12 months is about there's a most likely iron, zinc, and fat soluble and water soluble vitamin deficiency about into the control. It is not as much figure out things that the control and are that different from each other. There's only 5 to 10% deficient. Likewise, it is the same. In 12 ages, it is similarly that about 50 to 100% of the deficiency of micronutrients into the children under the age of 6 months. Please, next slide. Here, I want to conclude that still the total diet pattern study shows that the diet under the age of 0 to 6 is about good. There is only a need to add some more quantity of foods. And there's also the role of the mother's health that directly affects the nutrients of the breast milk. And 6 to 24 months age group, this study survey helps to make the policies of children to reduce the malnutrition to secure the future with good health. There is a still need to be assessed the nutrition status clinically. And the group 5, the children, good quality of food, water, and better environment as the comparison. Only the quality of food is not the main cause of the malnutrition. There's also need to be checked the quality of water and heating hygienicity parameter for further understanding. Thank you very much. Next slide.
Thank you very much, Sanam, for your presentation. The next presenter we have, the next presentation we have is evidence on dietary diversity and food and nutrition security of women and young children from Madhya Pradesh at Maharashtra, India. And presenter is Avani Verma. Avani Verma holds an MSc in Food and Nutrition, has been working as a junior technical expert in GIZ, Securing Nutrition Enhancing Resilience project from the last 6 months. And we are happy to welcome you to the presentation. Please take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Today, I'm presenting evidence on dietary diversity of women and young children from Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra, India. I'm from Securing Nutrition Enhancing Resilience Project, GIZ in India. Next slide, please. The Indo-German Development Cooperation Project, Securing Nutrition Enhancing Resilience, India, implemented by GIZ, is part of the global initiative One World, No Hunger by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Overall objective of the project is to improve nutrition situation of women of reproductive age and small children in 2 districts in Madhya Pradesh and 2 in Maharashtra. Project implements a nutrition-sensitive integrated approach, linking nutrition education with a multi-sectoral community nutrition garden initiative, which aims at improving the dietary diversity of women of reproductive age and young children in 2 districts in MP and 2 in Maharashtra. Our target group is 280,000 women and 56,000 small children. Project conducted a baseline survey with the objectives to determine the dietary diversity of women of reproductive age and children in the 4 districts and to ascertain information on households' access to nutritious food. Next slide, please. Coming to methodology, 2-stage probability cluster sampling was used with a sample of 800 interviews with the selection criteria of women with reproductive weight and at least 1 child in the age group of 6 to 23 months. In each district, 200 interviews were conducted. The selection probability of each village is proportional to its population size. The size of the interview clusters was set at 5 interviews per village. Key outcome indicators of the project are individual dietary diversity score women and minimum acceptable diets for children. Individual dietary diversity scores for women is used to measure the micronutrient adequacy of the diet of women in reproductive age and can be used as a proxy indicator for overall diet quality. Data on women's dietary intake was collected using the 24-hour dietary recall methods. Foods were then classified into 10 predefined food groups in order to calculate the score. Minimum dietary diversity in women is reached when 5 or more out of these 10 food groups are consumed. For children, minimum acceptable diet is used, which is a composite indicator of minimum dietary diversity and minimum meal frequency. Women were asked about the foods eaten on the previous day by their last born child, which is of the age group 6 to 23 months, and 7 food groups are used for the calculation of the indicator. Children who receive 4 or more of these food groups are counted in the numerator. Next slide, please. Coming to the results regarding the dietary diversity of women. The number of food groups consumed by women is around 4 food groups on average. The only exception is Barwani district, where women consumed more than half a food group less than in other districts. About 1/3 of the women eat at least 5 food groups in Khandwa, Nandurbar, and Washing districts. Vitamin and mineral-rich food groups were consumed only by a minority of respondents. From the results, we can understand that there is a substantial potential for improvement in consumption of dark green leafy vegetables and other vitamin A-rich fruits and vegetables. Next slide, please. Regarding dietary diversity of children, it is slightly better for Maharashtra than for Madhya Pradesh, with the lowest value in Barwani district, where children consumed on average 2.3 food groups against 2.9 food groups in Khandwa and 2.8 in Maharashtra. Consumption of children is also very consistent with the food groups consumed by mothers. Women, vitamin A-rich fruits and vegetables and flesh foods are consumed by less than 5% of children overall. So there is again a substantial improvement for caregivers to feed the vitamin and mineral-rich foods every day to children. Next slide, please. Coming to the feeding habits, it indicated that breastfeeding is practiced almost universally and 90% were exclusively breastfed. However, only 37% of families initiated timely complementary feeding, with the mean age of introduction of solid foods being around 6.9 months. So changing feeding habits warrants actually particular attention during training and counseling. Next slide, please. Project implements a nutrition-sensitive integrated approach linking nutrition education with homestead and nutrition garden. So we found that access to a nutrition garden is relatively small, with about 13% of all households having access to the nutrition garden. And while Barwani has around 22% households with access to nutrition garden, Washim has only 5.5%. Apart from Nandurbar, close to all districts having access to nutrition gardens grow vegetables. Growing vegetables is done usually the wet or rainy season in Barwani and Nandurbar, while in Khandwa and Washim, people having access to nutrition garden had grown vegetable all year around. So promoting households growing different type of seasonal nutrient-rich vegetables and fruits throughout the years seems as an impactful strategy to improve consumption and dietary diversity of families. Next slide, please. Recommendations would be to reinforce messages on appropriate complementary feeding, developing messages on diversified food production for a diversified diet. And further studies are required on positive deviance and social behavior change, determining beliefs and practices of the community to learn more on this topic. Next slide. I would thank you all for the attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we'd move to our last presentation, which is going to be by Karishma Nawalkar, who works at SNEHA, which is Society for Nutrition, Education, and Health Action, and is involved in monitoring, evaluation, and research, and works as a research coordinator for one of their projects. She'll be talking about implications of the revised definition of minimum dietary diversity for assessing dietary patterns of children aged 6 to 23 months in informal settlements of Mumbai. Over to you, Karishma.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible, and thank you for the introduction as well. Good afternoon, everyone. My presentation today is about implications of the revised definition of minimum dietary diversity for assessing dietary patterns of children aged 6 to 23 months in informal settlements. Right? My name is Karishma Nawalkar, and this is also co-authored by Dr. Rujita Sawant, Dr. Apurva Tiwari, Ms. Shushmita Das, and Dr. Indra Jayaraman, who are also part of the audience today. Next slide, please. So infant and young child feeding practices directly affect the nutritional status of children under 2 years of age and ultimately impact child survival. So the WHO published a set of indicators in 2008, which would help in measuring progress towards IFPRI-POSHAN. It had 8 core and 7 optional indicators and have been used since then as a standard for measuring and reporting and collecting on IFPRI-POSHAN practices around the world. That's what we have seen in our all previous presentations today as well. But the 2008 IFPRI-POSHAN indicators were also heavily weighed towards breastfeeding, and mostly optional indicators were not frequently used. Hence, in 2018, WHO and UNICEF convened an interagency technical consultation to discuss revisions in IFPRI-POSHAN. And by 2021, a guidance document with 17 indicators and no optional indicators was released. And there were modification, deletions, and additions to certain indicators. The interest today for our presentation is minimum dietary diversity. The definition and threshold for minimum dietary diversity was updated in this 2021 revision by WHO and UNICEF as part of the revised IFPRI questionnaire. Next slide, please. Which brings us to the objective to investigate the effects of this revision and the definition of minimum dietary diversity for measuring child feeding practices among children aged 6 to 23 months in urban vulnerable settlements of Mumbai. Next slide, please. This was a cross-sectional survey that was conducted in March and June 2022. It was conducted in 2 informal settlements in Sneha's project implementation area. The sample was 8688 mothers of children aged 6 to 23 months. We used both the questionnaires, the revised IYCF questionnaire in 2021 as well as the old 2008. And that's what I will be referring to during the course of the presentation. The interviews were conducted in a structured way and we took informed verbal consent. And the diet information was collected using 24-hour record. Now talking about the modifications or definition of MDD, as per the 2008 definition, the threshold was that the definition said that percentage of children who would consume at least 4 out of 7 food groups. Now this was revised to 5 out of 8 food group, and this included the inclusion of breast milk as the 8th food group. And there was a change in the threshold as well. Can we move next slide? Yeah. The results. So when we look at the prevalence of MDD as per 2008 and 2021 definition, when I use a 2008 definition, the prevalence is 30%. But when we use a revised definition, it drops down to 25%. Now, this can be attributed to the addition of breast milk as a food group, and changes in the cutoff led to the shift in estimates between 2008 and 22. Now, to further understand this better, we disaggregated it by breastfeeding status. You can see the prevalence of MDD as per definition 2008 and 21 for breastfed children and non-breastfed children. When you look at breastfed children, there wasn't any change. But when we looked at the non-breastfed children, there's a sharp decline from 46% to 18%. Now, this highlights that in non-breastfed children, there is a clear disadvantage because there's an absence of the food group of breast milk. So this would definitely influence their dietary diversity. Also, another reason could also be that early discontinuation of breastfeeding could affect this. Can we move on to the next slide? Now, when there's any change in the minimum dietary diversity, this would in turn also influence minimum acceptable diet, as it is a composite indicator calculated using MDD and minimum meal frequency. When we look at the 2008 definition, there is no change in definitions for minimum acceptable diet, but because there's a change in calculation for minimum dietary diversity, it would in turn this would in turn also influence minimum acceptable diet. So the change would be just 1%, 18 to 17%. But then again, when you disaggregate it by breastfeeding status, you would see there is no change in breastfed children. But when it comes to non-breastfed children, you could see a sharp decline because you can attribute this to the change in cutoff for minimum dietary diversity. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the policy implications are the revised definition of minimum dietary diversity emphasizes that breast milk is an essential part of children's adequate diet, and hence these findings can support in redesigning the existing nutrition programs with renewed focus on breastfeeding indicators such as exclusive breastfeeding and continuous breastfeeding for up to 1 year and 2 years, and optimal feeding practices. Now, these results also pave the way for opportunities for further research on breastfeeding status and using most of the modifications that have been done to assess optimal diets of infant and young children in vulnerable settings in a different way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karishma. Thank you for a very thought-provoking presentation. Certainly changing definitions and looking at current literature and other ways of looking at things does help us look at things differently. So now I guess we move towards the question and answer session. Dr. Sabrina, would you like to lead us through that?
I think the floor is now open for question and answers. We have some questions posed in the Q&A boxes. but if people would like to take them up and talk about them live, they can do that. Or if there are other people who have questions that they haven't typed in the Q&A box, this is the time to do this. Talk to the panelists about this.
Dr. Sabrina and Dr. Romania, till then, can we just take up the questions which are already in the Q&A box and pose them to the presenters?
Fine. So there is a question about role of pesticide and fertilizers in cultural foods. I'm not sure exactly to whom this was posed.
I believe this was posed to Farzana.
Okay, Farzana. Is Farzana here?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't get you. Can you please repeat?
So the role of pesticides and fertilizers in agricultural foods. I guess Dr. Dial Chand.
Actually, I cannot see the question.
Yes, but listen to us.
Okay,
Just
okay.
we will pose the questions for you,
Okay,
and you
okay.
can answer it. Okay.
Please.
So, how do you divide intervention in sustainable and non-sustainable? Is another question. I think this was also for Farzana, right?
Yes. Okay. Sustainable and non-sustainable interventions that actually I considered based on the, the outcome indicators. That is the nutrition, the interventions that were given, like nutrition education training and cooking demonstration. Based on those interventions, actually, I selected few of the indicators, outcome indicators. That is balanced diet, complementary feeding, and hygiene practices, the minimum dietary diversity, minimum adequacy of diet for the under 2 years of children. And based on those indicators, actually, I had the checklist for a guideline for focus group discussion and key informant interview. And based on those data, actually, I considered which of the interventions were sustainable and which were not.
Okay. Great.
Thank you, Farzana.
Okay. Thank you so much. There were another question about how long were these children, how old were these children at the time of primary data collection? Was the change in parental practices matched with anthropometric data?
Okay.
That's another question for you, Farzana.
Yes, for the primary data, actually, I considered those mothers who were the beneficiaries and who had children for under 5 years of age at the time of the intervention. And that after, when I found those beneficiaries who had under 5 years of children, those were the sample actually. And for anthropometric data, I would say that for my for the in baseline and inline, there was anthropometric data. But in the follow-up 1 and follow-up 2, there were no anthropometric data. It was qualitative study.
Okay. The next question is about whether you have had dialogues with Ministry of Food about your findings, or whether you plan to do this.
Yes, that's a better question. Actually, I have a plan, but for my study purpose, I mean for my research purpose, the objective was not like that. The objective was to identify the sustainability of the intervention program among the children of under 5 years age on their behavior, dietary behavior, and on their, for the understanding of better nutrition and for for the betterment of their lives. And but yes, from this research, I have lots of findings, and from that point of view, I would definitely love to talk with the policymakers.
There's also another question about engaging private sector. Do you plan to do it? Do you think you should be talking to private sector and all that? So
yes, definitely, absolutely. Actually, my study findings, I already discussed that the motivation is so very important, and it is obviously important to organize it by, the skilled professionals. Counseling is also very important, and that's why I would definitely encourage our private sectors to give their initiatives in awareness and, disseminating nutrition knowledge among the beneficiaries or among the needy people, I mean, among the people who need these suggestions.
and the next one is probably a comment rather than a question. Oh, not Ministry of Food, but MOFLS.
Yes, yes.
Fisheries and Livestock.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes. Actually, I told you that this my study findings actually asking me to do some more work with this.
Yes, absolutely. And PhD is a work in progress, right? You can now think about, once you analyze your data and you have some interesting findings, you can always engage people, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, and you should engage people. Anybody else?
So I'm happy to moderate the other set of questions here. Thank you, Sabrina and Farzana.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So this question is for Karishma, and the question is about your modified dietary diversity score. And the question is, was stop feeding also removed when you did your modified version of the score?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I think I've answered it in the chat as well. So breastfeeding was not removed because that was the point of revising the IFPRI, that they have included breast milk as a food group. So I think that will be included. So,
and top feeding, Karishma?
Yeah, that will be included.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. I see there's a raised hand as well. Neha, would you like to ask your question? Can we unmute Neha?
We have already unmuted Neha. Neha, you can talk now.
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
And kindly introduce yourself before your question.
Thanks for this interesting conference. I am Neha Khara, working as a food and nutrition security advisor for GIZ, Securing Nutrition Enhancing Resilience Project in Delhi. And I do have the question to Farzana, because we are also adopting nutrition sensitive integrated approach in our project, and would like to check with Farzana, have you also looked at the knowledge action gap which we have administered in our project? Like, we are giving nutrition knowledge to the target audience, as well as providing the agricultural inputs, as you have also done the agriculture and health interventions. Yes. But have you also checked the knowledge action gap, whether the education you are providing, the knowledge is being used, or they have the behavior change and they are consuming what they are producing or what they are getting the access to? So that I would like to understand from you, like the behavior change has already been observed in the target audience in your study area. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was my question.
Okay, thank you. Actually, from my part, that is follow-up 2 study, that is the qualitative study. There, I actually focused on the sustainability of the interventions they actually have. Yes, definitely I considered those knowledge gap, because I had the nutrition education sessions, dialogues and all those reports from FAO, and that's why I could actually identify the knowledge gaps. Yes, from qualitative point of view. Yes.
I think the beauty of Farzana's study was that it was done so much later after the intervention was finished. So what was interesting was what stays after an intervention is wrapped up.
Yes.
That is what she was looking at. And that's why it makes it so interesting, because in the gap periods, almost 5 years, there was no intervention.
Yes.
Right? So what really stayed with the community? We have often seen very many interventions given at community levels, and we often don't have the resources or ability to go back and see what stays. So this is a very interesting study in that regard.
Thank you so much. I also want to thank my supervisor, Dr. Nazma Shaheen, for allowing me doing this, and for her guideline. Because of her guideline, actually, I could do all this. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Any other questions people have? This is a good time to talk about it. Dr. Lalita is online, and do you have a question?
Dr. Lalita, if you want to ask your question.
Yes. Okay. Hello. Good afternoon. I just have a comment on Farzana's study, because this is a study we've been intimately involved with. And absolutely, Sabrina, you're right, that this lull in the period after the interventions were implemented. But the important point to note is that some of these results were actually, they fed into the national action plans. And I do understand that the Ministry of Fisheries and Livestock tried to field extension workers. And the attempt was to try and link the service delivery with the community-based approach. Now, how much of that has happened is the question. And that is where multiple interventions such as these are being implemented across multiple sectors. The second point is there have been other studies also. It would be good to share notes. And I'm sure Farzana has done that, where there has been some, I wouldn't say sustainability in that sense, but there have been some sustainable actions. And I think it's very important for us to pick up these lessons and enrich the findings of this study. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you for a very interesting discussion. I'd now request my co-chair, Dr. Sabrina, for concluding this session, and then I'll also share some remarks. Over to you, Dr. Sabrina.
Thank you so much. It was a very interesting session. It's a difficult topic. It's a complicated topic. People have talked about geographical variations in nutritional status, and it is obvious that one size doesn't fit all. So we really have to think about now customizing according to the culture and geographic region, the information and support that people need to actually conduct good IYCF practices. So dietary diversity, what was striking to me in those studies is that the dietary diversity was quite low. And animal source foods, and in some cases vegetables and fruits, were not really being consumed adequately among young children. And this is all over from different countries. This is the same thing that we see. And I wonder, what is the next steps? One of the interesting thing I noticed is that when you looked at, I'm not sure exactly which study it was, But when we looked at mothers' diets, they were linked with the child's diet, which means household food availability is very important, very key in ensuring that important foods are being consumed by young children. Long-term effect of an intervention is important to look at to see exactly what stays and why. It's very important. Those kind of studies need to happen. We need to learn the mechanism and see how people innovate once we give them new information, how they innovate and put it within their existing practices. And can we learn from it and replicate those lessons? Using radio as a way to provide information was interesting, because in Bangladesh, more and more radio is sort of being sidelined. But it's interesting that it's an interesting and cheap way of reaching people. And I wonder whether we should think about, including radio in our way of engaging with the community. And leveraging private sector. I think, it's obvious in all our countries, children are being fed from outside home, prepared food. And it's important now to think about important ways of engaging private sector to be responsible and responsive to the national needs and goals. So that's sort of my thing. And I would just hand it over to you, my co-chair.
Thank you, Sabrina. Very interesting presentations, and I'd like to start by thanking all of the presenters. I certainly stand more educated now than before. My comments, given my interest in NCDs, it was shocking to see that processed food intake has gone up so much, both in, for children and also for mothers. And at the same time, when looking at more nutrient-dense foods such as eggs and others, I was again very interested to see that the choice in terms of purchase is not driven by cost. It's rather driven by social pressure and what's culturally more acceptable. I didn't hear anybody saying that, oh, it's the cost of an egg because of which we are unable to purchase it or not purchasing it. So that for me was interesting. But I think there is hope. As we heard from a few very interesting presentations on what can help us move forward, right from working with the agriculture sector to the food industry, which I thought was a big feat, to mass communication and using radio, which I know in Pakistan, in particular in rural settings, is very much still heard and listened to. So very interested in hearing more on that particular presentation. And of course, the involvement of people who are the direct affectees or beneficiaries of this whole situation. I was also impressed by the work that looked at home gardening and the potential of home gardening improving nutrition-related outcomes. So I think we have to take, and we know this, and now I'm pleased to see all of this evidence coming out showing how multi-sectoral collaboration of working with people right from the agriculture sector to what was being labeled as private sector, but basically meant the food industry, to then working with mass media folks and then directly with people can bring about the desired change. So thank you all. And with these words, I'd hand over the stage to the organizers of this conference. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabrina and Dr. Romaina. It was a great session and you kept the session on time. Thank you all the presenters for the insightful presentations. And we hope that the connections made during these sessions, these presentations will also help you and will also help us inform the policy-making process in the coming days in our respective countries, at the national level, at the regional level. With this, I would like to end this session, but before ending, I would like to request everybody that we have our final thematic session for the Delivering for Nutrition conference at 3:30 p.m. India Standard Time today, which will talk about the policies and programming implications from all the evidence that we have gathered. And after that session, that is a 90-minute session, will end at 5 p.m. And without any breaks in between, we will start the closing plenary for the Delivering for Nutrition conference at 5 p.m., which will go on till 6:30 p.m. All the times are in Indian Standard Times. For your own time zone, you can look up the conference website because we have mentioned the different time zones there. So request all of you to kindly come back at 3:30 p.m. IST and join us for the policies programming session, followed by the closing session for the conference. Thank you. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
I'm ending the session.